So I was recently reading an article on establishing a culture of accountability. It was an HBR article, and I can't remember the exact authors, but in there, one of the stats was 69% of employees said they are not reaching their potential. Love that. So, I mean, it just really hits to your point. Like, find that coaching opportunity to help our team reach their potential. Yeah. Because when they do that, it allows us to work more on the business because we've got a great team under us that can work in the business. And if they feel like we're invested and committed to their growth, they're less likely to go anywhere. This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm your co-host this week, Brandon Smith, and I'm joined with my other co-host and co-founder, Randy Hain. Randy, how are you doing this morning, my friend, on this winter morning?
On a very snowy, beautiful morning, I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about our topic. We were thinking about topics to introduce this year. And, I was having a conversation recently. I was doing a workshop for a group of leaders, and this leader came up to me at the end. And now, to someone listening to this comment, you might not think this is a compliment, but I take it as a compliment. He said, I really liked your session. It was good. He said, you really didn't share with me anything new that I didn't already know, but it was good reminders of things I haven't been doing recently that I need to put back into my toolkit. And I really, honestly, between you and I, a lot of the stuff we do, we didn't invent it. It's best practices that leaders have been doing for a long time. But sometimes we just forget those best practices. We get caught up in urgent activities, caught up in distractions, and pretty soon the stuff that we know is really good for us to be doing as leaders kind of slips. So since we're moving into the beginning of the year, I thought it would be great to take on this topic. What are the leadership best practices that leaders in 2025 and beyond need to be revisiting because they're just so important to us as leaders? So I was inspired by that comment this week, my friend. I'd be curious to your reaction to this topic.
I love the topic. One comment on your attendees' comment was, I think what's interesting about that is we have such a challenge with focusing on the bright, shiny pennies, the innovative, what's new. But we forget that the simple, the basic, the practical, the effective approaches, you're right, always work. But we drift away because we're always thinking, well, there must be a better way. But you know what? I don't think you can improve on candor and better communication and time management. You just have to drill down and do the hard work. So I actually love that inspired you to think about this topic for today. I'm having similar conversations with clients about, let's not think about a brand new strategy for 25. Let's think about what have we learned over the last several months of working together? What's been on your mind of late? What are some of the things you're trying to get done? And let's really focus on practical and actionable approaches this year. And to the point you're making, a lot of those are things that are evergreen. So one that comes to mind, and it won't surprise you that I'm starting with this one, is I'm really challenging my clients to practice better self-care, but also to encourage that with their teams. Now, self-care as a term has been around for a while, and it got really big during COVID, but we've got to be mindful to take care of our mental, physical, even spiritual health. We've got to take good care of ourselves in order to be effective leaders and serve our teams, our companies, our families well. So just a couple of, things that I would put out there. Let's be mindful about managing our stress. Understand your stress triggers. What are the things that put you into a place where you act in a way that you're not proud of? What are some things that bring out maybe the worst in you, not the best in you? Be cognizant of those things and work really hard to mitigate the impact of those things or change your habits so you're not exposed to that stuff that triggers your stress. Exercise more, get more alone time, whatever it is that you need to bring your stress down is a great way to practice self-care. Another is just exercise better time management. Really think about how much time am I spending in ineffective, dysfunctional meetings every day? How do I find a way to pull back from the inefficient use of time that I'm usually, slipping into this time of year and get really dialed in on being careful about taking time for exercise, alone time, thinking time, strategy time, time for my team so I can develop them, whatever it is I need. So let's be mindful about not letting the meetings take over as they usually do for most of our clients. I think better prioritization, which is connected to time management. Make sure you're working on the right things. You can't have a list of 20 master priorities you're trying to get done every week. It's not going to work. Pick 3 or 4, focus on those, and when you get one done, pull one the big list over, and then make that part of the top 3 or 4 list. And then finally, if I'm ever talking to you about this topic, I'm always going to mention get some time for reflection and thinking. Turn off the gadgets, turn off your technology, and just find time to think and be in the moment and reflect on what you've learned, reflect on where you are, reflect on where you're going. So those are kind of my greatest hits when it comes to this idea of self-care for leaders in 25. So I'm going to lead with that one, Brandon. What about you? Which one
that's
that you
a good
want
one, Randy. So a couple of things. I don't want to get off that until we kind of properly put a nice big ribbon and bow on it. So what
Sure.
Randy's talking about is not only identifying those things that are important to you, but setting those healthy boundaries. You can't just set those in your mind. You got to communicate them. So if you're fortunate enough to be in an executive position and you have resources like an executive assistant, that is the first person you should go to after you've identified those new changes in your self-care routine. Because a well-trained and committed executive assistant, which is probably who you have, can really help you set and protect those boundaries. If you don't have an executive assistant, make sure you tell your team. So when they ask you for a meeting during one of the times that you've allocated for these other things, you can remind them of that conversation and hold that boundary. So I would just want to add that, Randy, because I think it's really important that we find ways to keep that. All right, so I'm going to move over into kind of the leadership arena for my first kind of foray into this kind of old school but new school kind of approaches to leadership. I had a mentor of mine, a professor, Mary Ann Glenn. She was a endowed chair at Boston College for many years. She was at Emory and then went to Boston College and then has since retired. And I remember she used to say, there's really only 5 ideas. There's like 5 ideas in the world of organization and management. There's 5 ideas. I thought that was a great way to put it. I never did ask her, what are those 5 ideas, Mary Ann? to remind us that, this is the stuff that's evergreen is there for a reason. So here is what I would want you to be doing as leaders. So in the book author editor that I wrote in 2022, I often talk about we want to be in the editor seat with our teams 80% of the time and the author seat only 20. And that 20% is really important to communicate 2 important things that most leaders today aren't doing as diligently and as disciplined as they could. The first one is strategy/priorities, making sure we're communicating those things to our team. So we're in a regular rhythm way, maybe our weekly meetings or whatever it happens to be, we're reminding our team, hey, these are our goals, or these are the things I need you to focus on this week. Our team needs us to do that. The second one has really slipped since COVID. You've probably heard me talk about it already on podcasts previous. It's culture. No one is talking about culture like they should be. They're talking about where people are working, whether they work from home or come into work or what days they come into work. That's fine. That's where people are working. That's not culture. Culture are the values and behaviors that you want your team members to embody in how they treat each other, how they treat customers, and how they approach their work. And we need to be defining that, and we need to be reinforcing that, because all the organizations around the globe that are high performing have winning cultures. You often hear sports teams talk about having a winning culture in our franchise. Like we want to build that. So spending time to think about what is that culture you're trying to promote and talking about that in a regular way, those would be old school things that would be quite appropriate for 2025. So Randy, that's my first entree into this conversation.
Fantastic. I love it. And, if we're going to continue with this theme of, I guess, old school is the new trendy, going down this path of what leaders need to really, maybe reconnect to for 25, I'm going to put out there a wonderful basic that I think is just being ignored. And that is leaders need to be better coaches. Now, you and I are coaches telling our audience, be better coaches. Because if you look at, for instance, Gallup survey last year, I think in May they came out with a really interesting data survey that said that 30% of employees were actually engaged at work, 30%. However, interesting subset of the data said that the teams that were the most engaged were led by coaching-oriented managers. So coaching-focused leaders are the ones that typically drive the best engagement. Well, how do we do that? Two simple things I'll leave you with. We've spoken before about, this mantra. I wrote about it in my book, Upon Reflection. It's ask, listen, and invest. So as you're engaging with your teams, especially at the beginning of the year, we need to be asking as leaders, hey, what are you working on? What are you excited about this year? What are some of the things that you're trying to get done? At the end of this year, when you look back, what do you want to have accomplished? And then very importantly, how can I support you in that? What can I do to help you make this actionable? So ask a lot of questions, but you know what happens if you're asking? You can't just be asking to hear yourself speak and move to the next question. We have to pause after every question and listen. Listen very carefully. Actively listen to figure out, what did I just hear? What is my teammate telling me? And then take that in and then come up with something thoughtful that allows you to make the third part of this work, which is invest. So we've asked the good questions, we've listened well, but now, based on what I've heard from you, how do I invest in you? How do I help you as a teammate, a colleague, to get the goals met that you want to meet? So I think ask, listen, and invest is a mantra that will help every leader become a better coach. And then I would be remiss if I did not invoke our friend Andreas Widmer's phrase, "Ti voglio bene," which is Italian for "I want your good." So if we have that mindset of ask, listen, and invest, and if it's activated by that wonderful phrase, "Ti voglio bene," I desire your good, that is a great way for every leader listening to this podcast today to have that coaching orientation for 25. So that's my second on the list today.
Love it, Randy. Love it. So I was recently reading an article on establishing a culture of accountability. It was an HBR article, and I can't remember the exact authors, but in there, one of the stats was 69% of employees said they are not reaching their potential. Love that. So, I mean, it just really hits to your point. Like, find that coaching opportunity to help our team reach their potential. Yeah. Because when they do that, it allows us to work more on the business because we've got a great team under us that can work in the business. And if they feel like we're invested and committed to their growth, they're less likely to go anywhere. So it's just, and it just makes you a good human. So I love that, Randy.
And by the way, Brandon, before we get off that, one of the things that I'm not saying is that as leaders, you have the complete responsibility for developing their leadership growth strategy. You should be delegating that to them. You should say, hey, I want you to come up with your plan this year and then come back to me and tell me how I can best support it. So the best coaching leaders I know are not writing plans at 10 o'clock at night for their team. They've empowered their teams to come up with their own development. They simply activate and empower those plans. Yeah. So please don't hear me giving you another to-do item. This is something that you really need to get your teams to do, and you support them.
I love it, Randy. And I'm hearing author, editor, and all that, Randy. Author the plan so you can edit, and that's exactly right. We just want to make space for it. Okay, so I've got mine. This almost feels like a friendly mock draft, Randy. So the next one I'm going to pull on the draft board. I'm sorry, my friend. You would have had this on your list of targets, but I'm taking it right off the board.
Okay.
Are you ready? It's old school.
Okay.
Really valuable. More time connecting with colleagues over a meal.
Wow, that is solid.
Solid. So I'm channeling my friend and colleague Randy. He's got a rule of 15. He says you have 15 meals in a week. There's a breakfast, there's a lunch, there's a dinner every day of the work week. 15 meals. Those are all opportunities for you to connect with perhaps a direct report in a coaching conversation in the company cafeteria, perhaps another one of your colleagues. Maybe you're a vice president and you're connecting with another VP over dinner to just connect and see how they're doing and how business is going and just build those relationships. But so important, because that's where we really form the inner workings of trust, is just that casual time with each other. getting to know people beyond just the work they do. Maybe hearing about their kids, or hearing about their hobbies, or hearing about the vacation home that they're renting, or whatever it happens to be. That ability to connect. And we used to do that really well. And leading up until COVID, it was fading, and it's really fallen off a cliff. But it is a great way to build those relationships. So our work feels more like actual relationships, maybe even more like a work family, rather than very transactional. And so the way to do that is just scheduling that time. Now, one more thing I'd want to add to this, just to add an extra kind of exclamation point to the whole conversation around building those relationships and connecting over a meal. Politics in any organization start at the director level. So you don't really have a lot of politics that you're dealing with as a manager. You may be the recipient of some, but you're not part of the game. You're part of the game once you get into the director level. No one tells you that, but you are. So you have to spend at least 10% of the time networking and building relationships with other directors to your left and to your right, both within your function and outside your function. With every promotion, you add another 10% to that. Senior directors should be spending closer to 20%. Vice presidents, 30%. EVPs or SVPs, probably more like 40%. And our C-level executives, if you watch their calendars closely, 50% of their time is just herding cats. They're trying to build these relationships, either aligning or realigning functions, people, and departments. So they're all moving down that path that executive has set. So this is foundational to starting that, is spending more of that social time. Now, it's going to feel unproductive because you're going to say, I don't have time to go have lunch with this person. I've got a lot going on. Everything's urgent all the time. So it feels inefficient, but it's highly effective. So I would challenge you, think about your ecosystem this year. Think about all your stakeholders, and are there any that you might want to strengthen ties and relationships with, whether it's a direct report on your team, or your leader or a peer, and be intentional to put it on your calendar. And then pro tip, if you've got the benefit of having an executive assistant or those kinds of resources in your disposal, this is a great conversation to have with this person starting on Monday to say, hey, I've got some folks I want to get on the calendar. Can you help me? And I'm sure they'll be happy to do that. So Randy, I'm sorry I took that from you, brother, but it was just right there. I couldn't let that pick pass to the next round. So hopefully you're okay with how I did that justice.
Fantastic. Yeah, it was on my list, but I love the angle you took. The only thing I would add to your great description of that, and I totally agree with everything you said, is when you look at your organization, if you reflect on last year, wherever you see pockets of distrust, lack of collaboration, lack of teamwork, if you start to really look under the hood and drill down a little bit, you'll often find that there are very poor relationships, that they have just not been spending enough time together, which reinforces the point you're making. So one of the best reasons to do what Brandon's advocating and spending more time over a meal is you're going to build those foundational relationships that lead to better teamwork, better trust, better collaboration. So, and in these conversations, by the way, one more thing, be really careful not to make it all about work. Make it personal. Be relatable, talk about your life, be vulnerable, be authentic. Don't come in with the 10 item work agenda. Let the conversation flow organically. It's okay to say, what are you doing this summer? How was your weekend? Hey, my kid has the flu. How's your family doing? It's okay. Not only is it okay, it is smart, because when people get to know you personally, that exponentially increases how they think about you professionally, and all good things come from that. So everything Brandon said, yes, I'll just give that little addendum to it.
That's great, Randy.
One that's on my list, Brandon, that I am actually talking to my clients about. This is my first week back at work, really. And every coaching conversation, I've touched on this. So I feel compelled to bring it up. Brandon, that there are certain sessions that you and I do in the Leadership Foundry for our clients that are evergreen, popular. They always want them. Your author versus editor, my candor session, your trust session. But one of the ones that is very popular is my clarity session, practical clarity. And every team, every leader would benefit from being focused on clarity. But I just want to talk about one of the 5 best practices that I talk about in that. I wrote about it in my book, Essential Wisdom in 21, and it is one of our sessions. But the one area of clarity that I really want to stress in our conversation now is setting clarity of expectations. I'm running into so many clients that are frustrated with, my team's not delivering, they're not being accountable. I don't know why so-and-so won't get back to me. So-and-so missed the deadline. We're really behind on our goals, whatever it is. And every time I drill down, I often find that this leader has either been the reason for, or they've been the recipient of a lack of clear expectations. Let me give you an example, a very easy one. If I were to say to the team, hey, listen, guys, we have got to get sales up this quarter. Go out and make it happen. That sounds like a very typical strong leader thing to say. It's absolutely worthless, because me saying get sales up to a room full of people, everybody's going to have their own way of thinking about it, doing it. We're going to get into each other's swim lanes and chaos ensues. So instead of being unclear, let's really focus on being clear. All right, listen, we have got to get our revenue up this quarter. Let's walk through what each of us is responsible for. For instance, Susan, I want you to focus on professional services this quarter. I'm asking you to elevate your number by 5%, and I'd like to see your plan in our staff meeting this Monday at noon on how you're going to do that. Now, in that kind of scenario, Susan's clear, the team is clear on what we're doing, and Susan specifically is very focused on plan, professional services, 5%. That seems so basic and easy, but I assure you, when we are busy and we're chasing our tails and we're racing all over the place and everything's urgent all the time, we are not thinking about being clear about setting expectations. So my sort of final add to this, when you're communicating to your team, let's start there. Make sure that you're giving them the why, the what, the when. Now, all of us fall into the trap of assumption. We assume that people know what we want. Fight that tooth and nail in 25. Even if it's someone that works with you every day, who knows you well, just be clear. Now, if you are, this is the second part, if someone asks you to do something, if you're given a task, if you get an email that says, hey, we need to go out and get the team's morale up, when you get that kind of message from your boss, a colleague, or whatever, push back respectfully. Hey, let me just clarify what I heard you say. Or can you give me a little bit more detail? When exactly do you need this? And ask good questions to qualify exactly what they're asking of you. So if everybody listening to this practices clarity of expectations in 25, you will be exponentially more effective as a leader. There, I think on the Leadership Foundry website, you'll definitely see a post I wrote about practical clarity. So that'll give you a little bit more detail. But Brandon, that's one of my biggies that I'm already seeing in the first week of the year. Let's get clear on expectations.
I think that's great, Randy. And if I put on my kind of workplace therapist hat, you can eliminate and prevent 50% of all workplace dysfunction that's people related by driving clarity, by doing exactly what Randy said. Both clarity around your expectations, but also clarity around others' expectations of you. It's when we guess wrong, and we either guess wrong or we decide, well, we can do whatever we want, that things go a little south. So I love that as a best practice. Okay, Randy, we're getting close on time, so I'm going to take one more off the board.
All right.
So my last pick today is an interesting one. So I'm going to back up a little bit. We've actually gotten a lot of requests going into end of last year and this year for one of our modules around strategic thinking, helping leaders improve their strategic thinking. And I think there's value in that. We're moving so fast. Sometimes we don't stick our head above the tree lines to do that. And Randy and I have some great practical approaches and tips to help leaders learn how to do that and do that quickly, do that well. But I'm also not so sure it's completely an issue of strategic thinking and not just strategic communication. So what tends to happen is, in absence of communication, people tend to assume the worst. And I can't tell you how many leaders that I've talked to that say, yeah, my people aren't thinking strategically. They might be, but they're not communicating their thinking to their leader. So here is what I'm getting at. Be really intentional in 2025 to communicate up your strategic plan for the year. So what's your targets for the year? What's your approach either for the year or 2 years or 3 years? Maybe you're leading a transformation. You're in IT, you're leading an IT transformation. Or maybe you're in finance and you're leading a finance transformation. Or maybe you're in marketing and you're going to do a new market entry. Whatever it happens to be, come up with that strategy and that plan, have that, and make sure every time you report out to your leaders a status update on how you're doing, don't start with the status update. If you start with the status update, then you're going to leave that meeting and they're going to say, oh, they're a really solid operational leader. You don't want that to be your label. You want to leave and have them say, that is one of our up and coming leaders. They could lead this business one day. In other words, they're strategic. And so the difference is the leaders that I see that promote themselves as strategic start with their strategy first. Here's where we're going as a reminder, as a function or department or business over the next 3 years. And then they say, and here's where we're at as it stands today. And then they might get into kind of red light, green light, yellow light kind of activities. But they put it within context. And when we share that bigger picture, people say, oh, they're thinking ahead. And in that little step, that one slide, it can be simple as just adding one slide, can make all the difference. I've had leaders that I've coached over the last few years that were really smart strategic leaders, and they were stuck because over the last 10 or 15 years, they never did what we're talking about here today. And the business just saw them as great kind of operational leaders. So making sure that we're not only communicating our strategy to our teams, but communicating to other folks. And we can pull all these things together. We can go out to lunch with folks and communicate our strategy. We can use those conversations as coaching conversations and embed our strategy as part of that conversation. We can have those folks come off and create their own plans. And we can even use that strategy as another opportunity for us to drive clarity. So all the best practices Randy and I talked about, they play nicely with each other. Mm-hmm. So Randy, I know we're almost at time here. Any closing thoughts you might have to our conversation today?
Now, listen, I hope anybody that's listening is just taking a few notes about, nothing we've said is crazy. Nothing we've said is, just wildly, unrealistic. Everything we've said is in the wheelhouse of everybody that listens to these podcasts. Just make a checklist and start working through them as best you can. One of the things that Brandon and I often do, and I'm going to end with this, is we offer things that often activate other areas of your leadership. And I'm going to give you one right now. Brandon's given you several. I want to give you another one just to think about as sort of my parting words. I want you to really focus on making curiosity your superpower in 25. I find that so many leaders often find themselves stuck or being ineffective because they're operating out of assumption. They've got a lack of data. They're not clear. And if we would just get into the habit of asking more questions, and then, as I said earlier, listening to the answer. So when you find yourself stuck this year, if you find yourself, wondering how to work through it, pick up the phone and call a colleague, get the team together, and actually ask questions. It seems so easy, but I assure you in corporate America, we see a lack of curiosity, but that's one of those things that activates so many other positive things that you could be doing. So operate with curiosity this year and make it a superpower.
Love that, Randy. I think the only other thing I would add to everything we talked about today is, for those of you who are listening, it was a big list, and that's okay. You don't have to do them all. Just pick one. If you pick one of those and are intentional and commit to it in 2025, Randy and I can guarantee you'll be pleased with the results because we didn't invent these things. They've been around a long time. They are best practices for a reason. So we feel very confident. Take one, put it in place. You're going to see a difference, and then you can rinse and repeat. So hopefully you found this conversation as practical as we always intend. Our challenge to you is, of course, take one of these, identify that one thing you could be doing tomorrow that's going to help your team thrive even more going into 2025.